Hello, and welcome to a short series of talks about culture. And I've called them Culture Vulture to give them some sort of rhyme more than reason, perhaps. Now I'm going to look at the word culture and ask, what is it? So you might want to switch off now if you think you know the answer, because of course it's pretty obvious, isn't it? What is culture? Culture is, and then you say whatever you think it happens to be. But Raymond Williams, in his seminal, if you're of the left, seminal book, Keywords, describes culture as one of the 2 or 3 most complicated words in the English language. And perhaps we'll try and unpick why that might be. Each episode, I suppose I call it, perhaps, I'm going to look at a work that gets us to the point of thinking about culture. What are the things that make up cultures, people of culture, someone who is cultured? What are all these things about? And as someone who studied culture, formally studied culture at a polytechnic in northeast London in the 1980s for 3 years, I feel I'm uniquely able to perhaps get to the bottom of some of the arguments, though not all of them by any means. And I don't think I'm necessarily going to reach any conclusions, no matter how long we talk for. But the first work, the work where one should start when discussing culture, is this book, Matthew Arnold, Culture and Anarchy. It's not the first person to mention culture, of course, nor was he certainly the last, and he's not necessarily the best by any means. But what I'm going to do is give you a taster of some of the things that he wrote. And if I can find them, I've got lots of sticky things in this book, post-its, I suppose you call them, that perhaps can give us some enlightenment as to what he was on about by culture. Now, this book was written in 4 or 5 essay short chapters, and is an essay overall. Now, the first chapter is the one that I want to concentrate on. It was written first, I think, and a couple more years before he completed the whole book. So this gives an insight into what he means by culture. And first of all, he takes on what other people might say it is, the disparagers of culture, as he calls it. Now, the disparagers of culture make its motive curiosity. Sometimes, indeed, they make its motive mere exclusiveness and vanity. The culture which is supposed to plume itself on a smattering of Greek and Latin is a culture which is begotten by nothing so intellectual as curiosity. It is valued either out of sheer vanity and ignorance, or else as an engine of social and class distinction, separating its holder like a badge or title from other people who have not got it. And this is something of his view about what others think of culture. And there we have it, you know, that culture is something about class, about distinction, about vanity and ignorance. I am cultured, you are not. So this is quite a radical little text, actually. It's not saying at all that the snobbery should be part of what culture is, or making you a better person in that sense of the word. In other words, vanity. It's not that sort of thing at all. So what does he go on to talk about? Well, he really talks about it as in terms of perfection. And let's have a look what he might say about that. Culture is then properly described not as having its origin in curiosity, but having its origin in the love of perfection. It is a study of perfection. It moves by the force not merely or primarily of the scientific passion for pure knowledge, but also of the moral and social passion for doing good. So it's the idea here, a love of perfect things, but also of an activity, of actually going out there and doing good in the world. And that perhaps gives it something, again, quite radical about it. He wants to make culture prevail, as he says. I say culture is considered not merely as the endeavor to see and learn, but also as the endeavor to make it prevail. The moral, social, and beneficent character of culture becomes manifest. So there he wants it to do good in the world. So to learn, to know things. The kingdom of God within you is something he talks about religion, but it becomes within you. But of course, then you go outwardly to make sure and help that this idea of perfection and can help imbue others, perhaps. If culture then is the study of perfection and of harmonious perfection, general perfection, and perfection which consists in becoming something rather than in having something, in an inward condition of the mind and spirit, not in an outward set of circumstances, it is clear that culture, instead of being frivolous and useless, has a very important function to fulfill for humankind, for mankind, he calls it, of course. Now, if it's got to be active, then you'd want him to say what? What does it do, this culture? And what precisely is it? And this is where, of course, he's to some extent found wanting, but he does sort of set himself up against what it isn't. And his idea against, I suppose, is the machinery of utilitarian, of course, the machinery of Victorian. Here we go. Faith in machinery is our besetting danger. Often in machinery most absurdly disproportioned to the end which this machinery, if it is to do any good at all, is to serve. But always in machinery as if it had a value in and for itself. What is freedom but machinery? What is population but machinery? What is coal but machinery? What are railroads but machinery? What is wealth but machinery? What are religious organizations but machinery? Now, almost every voice in England is accustomed to speak of these things as if they were precious ends in themselves, and therefore had some of the characters of perfection indisputably joined to them. So he goes on later to talk about barbarians and Philistines and the people who believe in wealth and machines to pump things out and to have, which has no value at all beyond that of making money. And whereas culture has to offer something else. To Arnold, culture says, consider people, their way of life, their habits, their manners, the very tones of their voice. Look at them attentively. Observe the literature they read, the things which give them pleasure, the words which come forth out of their mouths, the thoughts which make the furniture of their minds. I love that expression, the furniture of their minds. Would any amount of wealth be worth having with the condition that one was to become just like these people by having it? And thus culture begets a dissatisfaction which is of the highest possible value in stemming the common tide of men's thoughts in a wealthy and industrial community, and which saves the future, as one may hope, from being vulgarized, even if it cannot save the present. So there's some idea. I think he was someone who was brought up in a sort of Whiggish household, and this idea of perhaps you can't save the present, but, well, bringing sweetness and light, as he also called it, to people can perhaps save us in the future. Let's have a look, see if I can find anything on that. Oh, no. I was born in Oxford, so I quite like this little bit here. Oxford of the past has many faults, and she has heavily paid for them in defeat, in isolation, in want of hold upon the modern world. Yet we in Oxford, brought up amidst the beauty and sweetness of that beautiful place, have not failed to seize one truth, the truth that beauty and sweetness are essential characters of a complete human perfection. When I insist on this, I am all in the faith and tradition of Oxford. I say boldly that this, our sentiment for beauty and sweetness, our sentiment against hideousness and rawness, has been at the bottom of our attachment to so many beaten causes, of our opposition to so many triumphant moments. And the sentiment is true and has never been wholly defeated, and has shown its power even in its defeat. Right. Look at the course of, look at the course of the great movement which shook Oxford to its centre some 30 years ago. Yes. About the Oxford movement. I'm not going to go on about it, but Oxford, a beautiful place, the sweetness and light that perhaps exudes. So this idea of beauty is very important to him. The beauty of Oxford, of course, is true, but does that make it the people who go there better people or wanting to do good in the world? And is it beautiful throughout? And I would ask these questions of Arnold's ideas, but do we want ugliness in our cities? Do we want architecture and place that looks ugly? So culture, perhaps, or the idea of culture here, having some sort of standard about it is quite important. And this is, again, the pursuit of perfection. As he says, the pursuit of perfection, then, is the pursuit, here we go, of sweetness and light. He who works for sweetness works in the end for light also. He who works for light works in the end for sweetness also. But he who works for sweetness and light united works to make reason and the will of God prevail. He who works for machinery, he who works for hatred, works only for confusion. Culture looks beyond machinery. Culture hates hatred. Culture has but one great passion, the passion for sweetness and light. Yes, it has one yet greater, the passion for making them prevail. And this is key, you see. Here he goes again. Sweetness, light, together, and making them prevail. Making more Oxfords, perhaps. And it's something when you go into culture, people talk again and again about authenticity. Authentic things become through. And this again is something which Arnold really picks up on. We should be sensitive here. The creative power of genius, the national glow of life and thought, when the whole of society is in the fullest measure permeated by thought, sensible to beauty, intelligent and alive. Only it must be real thought and real beauty, real sweetness and real light. Oh, it's wonderful. This is, and this is seriously revolutionary. This is the social idea, and the men of culture, and this is a slightly ironic, I suppose, because it's the men of culture. Notice that the men of culture are the true apostles of equality. So perhaps it should be the people of culture, but again, of his time. The great men of culture are those who have had a passion for diffusing, for making prevail, for carrying from one end of society to the other. And this is it for educators, they might know this one. The best knowledge, the best ideas of their time, who have laboured to divest knowledge of all that was harsh, uncouth, difficult, abstract, professional, exclusive, to humanize it, to make it efficient outside the clique of the cultivated and learned, yet still remaining the best knowledge and thought of the time, and a true source, therefore, of sweetness and light. So we're getting the idea that culture is the best. It's going to enlighten us, give us sweetness and light. It's an internal thing that comes into us from around us. And then we feel we have to do something around what goes on around us and make it prevail upon the world around us, not for now, but for the future, to build something better, to move towards a utopian place, perhaps. And it's done through the best. Well, again, I'm saying we do have problems with this because he's obviously got an idea about it. And we think we know if Oxford could be if we look at Oxford, that sort of classical beauty. But he's got two ideas. He's definitely got the classical side to him. But in the book, he brings in the Greeks and the Hebrews and sets them in some sort of dichotomy with each other, which he says is a false dichotomy, and we need a balance between the two. I don't really want to get involved in that battle. There's the other thing about tendering against anarchies, that reason and thought and beauty and sweetness and light can take us away from anarchy, and he sees the anarchy of the world is falling into an anarchy at the time around him. And he is very much against a class idea that it's about the Philistines' taste and all that. He doesn't buy that at all. He's very much against the idea that this is the bourgeois. I mean, as a Marxist might later on look at it, it's something to do with bourgeois taste. But reading him, you might find that difficult to swallow, because you probably think, along with me, that perhaps he does have a bourgeois view of the world, whatever that might happen to be. But in the terms of what culture is, then I'm not sure he gets to the bottom of it, but he certainly opens up the whole place for debate. And the major debate is, does culture, being a cultured person, being encultured by the right, the best, make us better, or at least inside, and make us active towards doing good for others? So culture is the most resolute enemy of anarchy because of the great hopes and designs for the state which culture teaches us to nourish. But as believing in right reason and having faith in the progress of humanity towards perfection and ever labouring for this end, we grow to have clearer sight of the ideas of right reason and of the elements and helps of perfection, and come gradually to fill the framework of the state with them, to fashion its internal composition and all its laws and institutions comfortably to them, and to make the state more and more the expression, as we say, of our best self, which is not manifold and vulgar and unstable and contentious and not ever varying, but one and noble and secure and peaceful, and the same for all mankind. With what aversion shall we not then regard anarchy? With what firmness shall we not check it, when there is so much that is so precious, which it will endanger? So that for the sake of the present, but far more for the sake of the future, the lovers of culture are unswervingly and with a good conscience the opposers of anarchy, and not as the barbarians and Philistines, whose honesty and whose sense of humour make them shrink from treating the state as too serious a thing and from giving it too much power. For indeed the only state they know of and think they administer is the expression of their ordinary self. And though the headstrong and violent extreme among them might gladly arm this with full authority, yet their virtuous mean is, as we have said, pricked in conscience at doing this. And so our barbarian secretaries of state let the park railings be broken down, and our Philistine aldermen colonels let the London roughs, I love that, rob and beat the bystanders. So there they are. The Philistines and the barbarians are those in charge of us. They're the ones who don't appreciate culture, the ones who are currently, at that time, in charge of the state. But he wants to bring the state, and notice this state is quite authoritarian, I think. It definitely wants to stop certain things happening. And I think it's universal as well. I think it was the sense of the worldwide value of it. So and it's static. It's not going to change. These are values, this perfection, yet it changes. Earlier on we talk about that there is a certain sense of the present about it, but there is also, I think, these sweetness and light is something which is achievable. Though he doesn't quite tell us what it is. And even in education, here we go. Since education is the road to culture, we gladly lend them a hand with their practical operations if we could lend them one anywhere. Yet if we see that any German or Swiss or French law for education rests on very clear ideas about the citizen's claim in this matter upon the state and the state's duty towards the citizen, but has its mechanical details comparatively few and simple, while an English law for the same concern is ruled by no clear idea about the citizen's claim and the state's duty, but has in compensation a mass of minute mechanical details about the number of members on the school committee and how many shall be a quorum and how they shall be summoned and how often they shall meet, then we must conclude that our nation stands in more need of clear ideas on the main matter than of laboured details about the accessories of the matter, and that we do more service by trying to help it to the ideas than by lending it a hand with the details. I love that. The fact that we look more at the operations of education, we look at how we're going to fill the classrooms with the numbers of teachers we need, numbers of pupils, we're going to put them in this room, that room, how many governors are we going to have. We look at all the mechanistic side of education, but we don't look at the most important part. What you're teaching, why you're teaching it, how you're teaching it, all those things perhaps, which are the stuff of education and the stuff of culture, enculturing the future generation, perhaps, that Arnold would want us to do. I don't know. Get this book if you haven't read it, because it's a fantastic grounding in lots of the themes around culture that still run to today. This idea, you know, of imbuing people with cultural capital, that they perhaps become better in some ways. Well, he's arguing against and for that at the same time. You know, he's got for the idea that culture does you good, but he's not saying in terms of class, in terms of social position. There's something beyond that, a higher purpose to it. And he brings it into God and a sort of religious zeal to it. This is a great polemic. Do take it on. I've got lots of problems with it. But it's certainly, funnily enough, when I was studying cultural studies at university, this was our first text. This is where it begins. And that was a very left-wing Marxist course that had huge problems with this book, but it opens up the huge groundwork that has been done, you know, around the whole issue of what culture might be, that is still central and still fought over to the present day, where we hear lots of stuff, of course, week in, week out, day in, day out, about culture wars. And I will get to that at some point in this series. Thank you for staying so long, if indeed you have, and see you soon.